He is a 6-time Ironman World Champion. He's a 10-time champion of the Nice Triathlon, an inductee into the USA Triathlon Hall of Fame, the Ironman Hall of Fame, and the first ever world champion at the Olympic distance in Avignon, France. Give it up for Mr. Mark Allen. Now, I love it when worlds collide. The Gripster is nicknamed Grip of Death.
Oh no.
When we first started the San Diego Triathlon Challenge to help Jim McLaren, who was a dear friend of Mark's, I was interviewing him at the La Jolla Cove and just said, what does it mean to have some of the legends of triathlon here like yourself and as an age group athletes and then our challenge athletes? And he goes, well, this is all about athletes helping athletes. And it just stuck. That was just something that resonated. You remember that first year you were here?
Oh yeah, they had a criterium and they had all this stuff in challenge athletes, and it was so clear to me. Like, I don't know if people in general at that point in time thought of people who were in a wheelchair or had a prosthetic that they were actually athletes. And it's like, you look in their friggin' eyes. They are 1,000% athlete. And that's what I said to you. This is athletes helping athletes. This isn't athletes helping anything other than other athletes, period. Purely, period,
And I remember when in 93, when you won in Kona, one of the first people there was Jim McLaren, who had just been paralyzed. And he talked about the energy, the hug that you gave him at the finish line. He could just feel the power, and he could feel that how important it was for him. We put him in an air ambulance after Jim McLaren, who we started the foundation for, when he was first injured. It was in June, and his doctors were saying there's no way you can get him to Kona in October. We put him on an air ambulance and got him to Kona, and it was really cathartic for him because he realized at the carbo party when everybody stood up and gave him a standing ovation that his family was still there for him. His triathlon family was there for him, and that really helped him because after he'd already been an amputee, and when he got hit again and became a quadriplegic, at that point he was ready to give up. And after he came to Kona, then he was like, okay, I can get through this, and he did. So Gripster, let's talk a little triathlon. Triathlon, yeah, it's sort of a funny sport.
You guys do triathlons?
Yeah, here we go.
Well, hell, here we go.
We've got a lot of triathletes in the house. How'd you get into this thing?
Triathlon?
Yeah.
Oh, triathlon. Well, my triathlon journey started in 1982. Probably half the people who started in 1982 aren't around anymore, but that was 41 years ago. Like I had to do the algebraic advanced math just a little while ago to figure out, holy crap, that's a long time ago. Anyway, I was 24 years old, and February 1982, like all of America, we had the television on to watch Wide World of Sports because in 1982 that was like the only sports program there was, right?
That was it. Three stations.
Yeah, and Jim McKay was always saying something about something amazing, and so I flicked it on. I was living in Del Mar at the time, and I got home late. It was partway through the program, and I turned it on, and here's this thing called Ironman, and 2.4 miles swim, 112-mile bike ride, marathon. And I'm thinking, geez, how many days is it taking to finish that?
I better pack a lunch.
Yeah, and Jim McKay reaffirmed that they start at 7 a.m, and the last person has until midnight, 17 hours later, to complete it. And I thought, there is no way a human body can do it. There's no way. But of course, as I watched this program unfold, these seemingly ordinary-looking people, like we all look kind of ordinary, right? They were crossing that extraordinary finish line, and it was just emotional and amazing. And that was the year Julie Moss fell, and the whole thing with her and Kathleen McCartney, and it was legendary and it was emotional. And a couple weeks after that, there was this little voice that was like, you have to go there and do it. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm like, yes, you do. I'm like, no, I'm not. I think I am, And so And so whatever, 8 or 9 months later, I was on the start line. And,
But where'd you qualify?
Yeah.
You sent your $25 in, you were in. There was no qualifying.
Yeah, you had to call up the Ironman office. They sent you the application. You sent it in with a check and a headshot, and you were in the race. And but there were no coaches. There was no template of how, there was no TriDot. There was no Ironman University. There was none of this stuff. And so, I contacted a friend who was a cyclist, and we went down to a bike shop in San Diego, and I got a used bike for $500, and it was a 10-speed. And you know what 10-speed meant back then? There were 10 speeds, not on the back, but overall. And I had my cycling shoes. They had toe clips, and you had to tighten them in because there was no anything. And
cleats, yeah.
There were cleats. And in the race that year, I had on a wool jersey because there was no nylon. And Dave Scott was the guy that was, he was the guy, he'd won the race once, and he was just like this superhero, like he got off the plane in Kona and he looked like this inflatable blow up of himself, like invincible, right? And so we had no idea what to do for food. And so we heard that Dave Scott ate dried figs for his nutrition, highly concentrated carbohydrate. And so I have a degree in biology from UC San Diego, so I was smart. I calculated how many calories I was going to need on the bike, and I figured out how many calories are in a dried fig, and I figured out that I needed 47 of these things on the bike. And I had tried one fig just to see, and I'm like, okay, I can do this. And so my jersey pockets I was like a chipmunk, I had like, talk about saddlebags. Yeah, well, and so I had these 47 figs stuffed in my jersey pockets, and I got down the road ways on the bike, and I'd eaten 13. And number 14 got pulled out, and I go, if I put this thing in my mouth, those other 13 are going to come up all over the lava. And I go, I can't do it. I can't do it. And so has anybody ever told you to practice in training what you will be doing in the race?
No.
So anyway, I lost a few figs, but
but also, like you said, Dave Scott was the guy, and you had won this horny toad triathlon, right? Mm-hmm. And that you're on the cover of Running and Triathlon News magazine. That was a big deal. So when you came over, people are trying to figure out who's going to be a factor here. They had no idea about you. They even had Mark's name. It's not the most difficult name in the world to spell, Allen. They had it spelled Allan on ABC Wild Sports. They had no idea who this guy was. So you catch up to Dave on the way out to Hawaii, and being Mark Allen, what'd you say to him?
Yeah, well, he and I had the Horny Toad Triathlon, by the way, was a half Ironman distance race here in San Diego, and it was self-supporting. So you had to have people providing you with your nutrition. It was out, Elfin Forest and Torrey Pines. Yeah. Amazing race. But anyway, so I get to Kona, and somehow and in that race I actually beat Scott Tinley and Scott Molina,
who were two of the best
guys. Tinley had won Ironman once, and Molina was a contender. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, this Mark Allen dude, And so anyway, ABC decided that they were going to do an interview with me prior to the race, and I had never done an interview before. And this was back in the days when, you didn't have digital. They had film that they had to put in the camera. And Diana Nyad, that name, Diana Nyad. If you
swimming in a shark tank. Yeah.
Yeah, swimming from Cuba to Florida. Only person to ever do that. As a over 60-year-old woman. Badass. So anyway, so here we are, and she and I are talking, and I'm ready to do the interview, and it's outside in Kona and beautiful and tropical, and she's like so friendly and nice, and she goes, "You guys got the tape rolling?" And they're like, "Yeah." And she leans forward and she goes, "So Mark," and I thought she was going to chew my head off, and I was so nervous that I started shaking and my voice was rattling and I couldn't even answer the questions. And she goes, stop. And so she goes, let's start over. And then she switched back into her nice Diana.
Whoa.
But anyway, where the hell am I going with that? So anyway, I had never spoken to Dave Scott before, and I actually came out of the water on his feet. He was first out of the water, and I was second out of the water. And, I was like not expecting that because this is my first Ironman. It was going to be my only Ironman that I was going to do because I thought I'll do this crazy thing, and then I'll get serious about my life.
And go make a living, be a doctor or whatever.
Yeah, I had a degree in biology. I was going to be something. And so anyway, I came out of the water in second place, and I'm like, wow. And I was on the feet of this guy, and I didn't know who it was, and I saw that I was in second place, and I ran up because I had to see, and it was Dave Scott. And I was just like, this is a really good sport. I like this sport. and so, I had no idea what I was doing. So we were just I was just sort of following him, and we made it to Javi, the turnaround, and we headed back, and there were horrendous tailwinds, headwinds on the way out, tailwinds on the way back. And we had about a 5-minute lead on the chase group of whoever they were. And finally, our speed slowed down as the winds shifted. And, I had never talked to Dave before. So I figured, perfect time for an introduction. And so I pedaled up next to him and I go, hey, Dave, when we're done with the bike, you want to go for a run?
And he liked that.
Oh, he's like, who are you? And I said, well, Mark Allen. And he goes, oh, I think I've heard of you. And he clicked his bike into a big gear and he took off. And so I figured, well, conversation with the champs, done.
Yeah.
That didn't go so well. And so I clicked my bike into a big gear and I heard this massive grinding and clanking sound. And I looked down and my derailleur had snapped off and my chain got stuck in the biggest chain ring with over 50 miles to go. Biggest gear, biggest chain ring. And so my Ironman was over because there's no way I could make it in that gear. Kona is just impossible. So I didn't achieve that dream of, being an Ironman finisher,
Right.
but, I had been with the best guy in the world for 7 hours of racing, or for several hours of racing. And so that was really where, the dream started to form. Like maybe if I take my time as an athlete and really develop my skills and experience, maybe I can be the champion of this incredible race. And that's where it started.
Well, and a few months earlier, the first ever United States Triathlon Series event was in Torrey Pines. It was June of 1982, and that came on the heels of Julie Moss, Kathleen McCartney. That race and that crawl had touched a nerve, and it ended up launching a United States Triathlon Series event in June of '82. And then they moved the Ironman from February, where it was really difficult for people from around the world to train for it. They moved it to October, and that's the race that Mark did. But he went to that USTS race in June of '82. And when you were a swimmer, when you were swimming at UCSD, I think you had told me at one point, if somebody caught me, I basically gave up. But in this sport, it was Dave Scott was winning that first USTS race. Scott Molina was in second. Scott Tinley was in third. You get passed by a guy named Dale Basescu. He's in fourth. You're in fifth. The old track record would have been, okay, I get fifth place. But that day was different.
Yeah, I came off the bike in fourth place. And these three icons were ahead of me. And I started running, and it was my first triathlon ever. And as you said, a guy, Dale Basescu, passed me. And so I had this swimmer's tape from 10 years or 12 years of competitive swimming. If somebody gets a stroke ahead of me, they're going to win. I'm going to lose. I can't do it. You know how those tapes are that we have that maybe don't have anything to do with reality. Well, Dale passed me, and so the swimmer's tape started playing. Oh, you went from fourth to fifth. He's going to keep pulling away. You can't catch him. And then there was some part of my brain just turned it off and said, wait a minute. There's a few miles to go here in this run. It's not written in stone yet. Until we cross that line, who knows what's going to happen? And that was just like this amazing transformation in me personally as an athlete, because it was the first time I thought, just because somebody looks stronger in this moment doesn't mean they're going to be stronger than you all the way to the finish. And everything just relaxed. My breathing relaxed. My shoulders came down. my stride loosened up, and all of a sudden Dale is not pulling away from me. And all of a sudden I'm catching back up to him. And all of a sudden I moved back into fourth, and I finished in fourth that year. And the talk after the race was, Dave Scott first place, Scott Molina second place, Scott Tinley third place, and this guy, this newcomer Mark Allen in fourth place. And on the results page, that was pretty impressive, but the real impact on that day for me was, again, seeing that your performance is not only about your fitness, but also about what's going on inside of you internally. And that really became a focal point for how I prepared for my competition and my training, my racing. And, we always have these ideal scenarios in our mind of how we want our competition to go, our race day to go, but rarely does the real world provide you with that ideal opportunity. It provides you with many different opportunities. And those opportunities are to get yourself to just shut the F up, right? Because when things start to go south and you don't feel good, something tightens up, something's happening that you hadn't expected, usually there's that little voice that's like, oh, this isn't good. I didn't train right. You start whining, right? Wah, wah, wah. I want it to be easier. I'm hurting. Nobody else is. Wrong. Everybody's hurting. Okay? So that's when I started to work with that space, like, whew, just get your mind to be quiet. For sure, if you're feeling lousy, it's hard to find a positive thought about that lousy feel, but you don't have to let it affect you. You don't have to let it hold you back. You can still get 100% out of that down moment, and that's what I tried to do in every race and every moment. And for sure, in an Ironman, the longer the race, the more opportunity there is for stuff to go right, but also to go wrong and to not feel good. And you just pull yourself back out by just, whew. All right, there's that quiet space. And when you're in that quiet space, you don't need to feel good to keep going at 100%. And you just get, there's that flow and that rhythm, and your internal space becomes very simplified. And it's just like, you're aware of your breathing, that sound going in and that sound going out. And it's almost like it's mesmerizing, and it gives you strength, because when your mind is focused down in that one little simple thing, whatever it is, you're thinking about your stride length or your stroke, or relaxing your shoulders, or just hearing your breath going in and out. There's not space for any of that negative stuff. And if something's not going quite right, it doesn't affect you at all. Yes, your legs will still hurt. It will still be hot, but you'll be going at 100% of your potential. And that's the ultimate day, the more time you spend in that space.
So when we look at Kona specifically, so 82, derailleur falls off, 83, you get third, 84, right? 12-minute lead off the bike. You must be thinking, I've got this nailed now.
Who can catch you when you have a 12-minute lead? Everybody. If you end up walking on the marathon, you ain't going to win the Ironman World Championship in Kona. I came off the bike 12 minutes ahead of everybody else. That was a significant lead, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
12 minutes?
Oh, yeah.
You do the math, that whoever's going to get second is going to have to make up at least about 30 seconds a mile. That's a big ask, right? And so the way that the course was back then is you rode all the way through the town of Kona. Then you had a 10K straight in the other direction to get out up onto the Queen K Highway, where you would then run 10 miles out and 10 miles back. And so in the town, of course, there's thousands of people cheering, and I'm running along and I'm high-fiving because, I have got this thing, a 12-minute lead, ladies and gentlemen. And people are like, go Mark, go Mark, go Mark. And a lot of people are like, go Dave, because they figured the only guy that could be in the lead was Dave Scott. And I'm like, I'm going, thank you. But anyway, I was going to give him my business card. My name is Mark Allen. But anyway, so I'm running and I'm feeling great. And I ran up Palani Road. At the bottom of the hill, I thought, I've got this thing. At the top of the hill, I made it up. It's a pretty steep hill, and there's a tailwind, and your core temperature goes up because the wind is moving the same speed as you are. And so there's no way for your body to get rid of heat. And I got up to the top of the hill, and I made that left. And now I'm looking at 10 miles straight out on the Queen K Highway before I make a turn and run 10 miles back. And I got out on the highway, and there's nobody out there. Nobody's cheering. Nobody is getting in the way of me finally tuning into how my body's doing, and my body's not doing well. And all of a sudden, I felt like I'm running on fumes and I've got 20 miles to go. This is not good. Where's a fig?
I need a whole bunch.
I got to use a bunch. Yeah.
About 140.
I had completely gone too hard on the bike, burned through all my matches, and there's no way to put those calories back in quick enough to sustain a fast enough pace to hold off people who are running behind you. And I knew that eventually I would end up having to walk. And I did. I walked and I jogged and I walked and I jogged. And it was an extremely hot year. And of course, at some point I was passed, and, I was just trying to hang on to get to the finish line. And I must have looked really bad, because at one aid station, I felt like a car's radiator that was going to explode. And so there was a bucket of ice water, and I stopped and I just poured the bucket of ice water over my head. And the medical team came up right then, and they go, we need to ask you a few questions. And I'm like, I'm doing the Ironman. I'm not, and they go, where are you? And I go, I'm doing the Ironman. And they go, what's your name? And I go, Mark Allen, leave me alone. I got to get going. And they go, what day is it? I'm like, oh, shit. It's either Saturday or Sunday. And if I get this wrong, they're going to pull me. And I go, it doesn't matter. Let me go. And they go, okay, just keep going. I'm like, phew.
So at the same time, now the sport is getting bigger. There's more money in the sport. At this point, the Ironman didn't offer any prize money. There was nothing at all.
Right.
And so 1985, there was no money. You weren't there. Dave Scott wasn't there. But then 86, all of a sudden there's $100,000. You guys are back. But you weren't planning. You had just won Nice, 2 weeks beforehand? You weren't really planning to do Ironman 86.
No, in 1980, I had been doing the Nice Triathlon every one of these early years also, and this was the 5th year that I was focusing on Nice and not really Kona now, because I'd had great success in Nice. I had won 4 times in 4 starts there. In 1986, I won the 5th in 5 starts, and it was 2 weeks prior to Kona. And I just flew over to Kona. I was just going to watch. And a week before the race, I was taking it easy on Kauai, and I thought, I feel really good. Nice, by the way, was a 3/4 Ironman distance. It wasn't, it was like the ITU long distance. So anyway, not quite as long, recovery a little bit quicker. And so anyway, I thought I'm going to run 2 hours, and if my legs feel good, I'm just going to see if I can get in and run it. And I ran 2 hours. I'm like, I feel fine. I competed that year. I got second. I was never in the mix, though. Dave Scott won it pretty handily. I just didn't have that little extra I needed to.
I almost had the impression that year, because Dave knew that you had just done these. You knew you had just done these, and I see you guys down at the pier, and you could chat with each other and be sort of friendly, because I think he knew he was going to win, and you sort of knew he was going to win, but you wanted to get through this thing and see how it would go. Then the following year, 87, we signed a book deal. You signed with Kellogg's Prograin, which was a Ironman Tough cereal. So now Mark Allen has a cereal deal based on an Ironman event that he hasn't won, which probably didn't go over that well with Dave, I'm assuming.
He was a little baffled why he didn't get that deal.
No, yeah. He was not very happy about that. So I remember being at the pro meeting, and you and Dave were sitting like we are right now, and you guys never made eye contact. The tension, I think, had gotten to a different.
Dave, how you doing?
No.
So is that when you felt like the real rivalry had started?
It had really started in earnest at that point, because this was going to be my 5th attempt at trying to have a great race in Kona, and it had never quite gone how I had hoped. I had races where I swam, bike, and ran all the way through, but at a very conservative pace, and I had years where I had really pushed it, but then I fell apart.
Yep.
And I had never hit that point where I had a really hard, solid race, but didn't fall apart. But anyway, I thought this year I'm really ready, because I had done a ton of training. I had really upped my volume on a lot of things, and I thought, I know Dave hasn't done this much training. You know how that mentality is. If I just train more, I'm going to do better. Has
A lot of
anybody
nodding
ever
out
thought
there,
that before?
Yeah.
No, that's not the answer, ladies and gentlemen. It's not always the answer. And so you have to do a certain amount, but too much obviously is not smart. And so anyway, I thought I had it, and I held back a little bit. I waited until, I kind of held back a little bit on the bike, and on the run, Dave and I actually were kind of together in the first, once we started going on the run, and around the half marathon point, somewhere around 10 or 12, 13 miles, half marathon point, somewhere around 6 miles. No. I felt really good, and I thought, let me see if I can. I mean, this dude like rinses his cottage cheese, right? And I don't want to be around him. No, he's won 5 of these. He doesn't need to win another one. And so I pulled away. And with 10 miles to go, I had a 5-minute lead over Dave Scott, the best guy in the world. And I made that turn to have 10 miles back to the finish. And as we passed each other, he still has to go out to the turnaround. I'm coming back. And when you pass your competitor like that, you try to look as good as you can, because you don't want them to, if you're suffering, you don't want them to know that, right? And when we pass each other, I had sunglasses on, so I could kind of like peek over at him without him seeing me peeking. And I'm thinking, he doesn't look so good. And so I thought, I have this thing. Well, by the next aid station, a mile later, I was starting to feel my energy dipping. And I'm like, this isn't feeling so good. And so I went through the aid station slowly, and I got some food, and I got some water and some calories. And I'm like, get some stuff in the tank here, buddy. By the next aid station, I was feeling really lousy. And that one I walked through, because I thought, I need something in the tank. And nothing was absorbing, I could tell. And I go, okay, repeat scenario, Groundhog Day. Once again, I'm not going to be able to run this whole marathon. And sure enough, I started slowing, and then I'd get to the point where I could only walk, and then I'd walk until energy came back, and I'd jog a little and walk and jog. And at one point, you have to understand, Dave Scott is a 5-time Ironman champ. I have won 0. Okay, so Dave Scott has 2,000 cameras and motorcycles and vehicles following him, and I have one little dude on a moped.
Who's going? Where's Dave Scott?
Yeah, and so all of a sudden, here comes the entourage as I am walking. And back then, the cameras were on the back of big vans. And so here comes the big camera van. And as the camera van is passing me, I see Dave try to slip on the other side of the camera van so that I don't see him. And I'm thinking, dude, do you not know that I know that you're there? And as he passed me, as he's trying to sneak by on the other side of the van, and I'm walking and he's running, I'm thinking, damn, he is looking good now.
Well, and that's the one, when you finished, you ended up in the hospital. That was a pretty serious situation.
Yeah, I had internal bleeding. Something went haywire in my intestines, and they got really tight. And your intestines, the lining comes off very easily anyway. And they were really tight from the beginning of the day. And, when you're in a competition like that, the blood goes out of your digestive system even more into the working muscle, and there wasn't enough oxygen, and the lining came off. And I had internal bleeding. I ended up having to go to the hospital. They couldn't find where it was bleeding. And they said, if it doesn't stop by the morning, we're going to have to cut you open. And fortunately, it had stopped by the morning, and I was able to hobble my way back to the awards. I finished in 5th place that year, which, again, there was a real deep lesson that I learned from that. And that lesson was that, once Dave Scott passed me and I wasn't going to win, now it's like, what's my purpose? What should I just quit? Should I drop out? Should I just take it easy? What am I out here doing? Because the main reason I came here is gone. And I realized, you know what? I'm not going to win, and my body's at about a 20% capacity right now.
Right.
But I want to give 100% of what I can in this 20% situation. And that has worth, and that has value to me. And if I can get to the finish line, giving everything I have, even in this weakened state, then when I cross that line, I will be able to hold my head high and say I gave everything I had. And that's the best day that I could have out there with everything that was taking place. And I ended up, as I said, in 5th place. And back then, top 5 were the ones that were brought up on the podium. So the next night at the awards, I was still able to go up there and be honored as, you know, a top 5 finisher. And people knew what I had gone through. And ironically, sort of, you know, this is nothing against Dave, but it's kind of something against him. But you know, there's a newspaper there called the West Hawaii Today, and you know, somebody brought it to me the next morning in the hospital the day after the race. And of course, I'm reading the article on the Ironman, and there was the only thing that Dave Scott said about me in the article was, "Yeah, Mark Allen, he was on my feet the entire swim, and he kept hitting my feet, and it was bugging me, and I couldn't believe he was doing that." And I'm thinking, dude, you just friggin' won the race, and I'm in the hospital. Can't you say something nice? Like, I hope he's okay. You know?
He needs to do his own race. He needs to quit following me. Yeah. So you mentioned something there about getting the most out of what you have that day. And I know you had a race in Nice, which you won 10 times, where you woke up on race morning, and it was a very similar situation where you were sick, right? And the part of it is you're thinking, well, I probably shouldn't go to the starting line. But you decided, I'm going to go to the starting line, and maybe I'm at 60, 70%, but I'm getting 100% out of that and be happy with the effort. That was a pretty special day.
Yeah, it was, I think it was sort of around Nice number 4 or 5. I can't remember the number. But anyway, I woke up race morning, and I felt fluey and achy and a little bit fevery. And this was before COVID. So if you were feeling sick but you could stand up, you went outside anyway, right? But anyway, I thought, I've flown all the way over here from the United States. I prepared for it. At least just start the swim, and if you need to drop out after the swim, fine. And so I did the swim, and I came out of the water, and I felt lousy, but I thought, well, I'll just get on the bike, and at any point I can just drop out, you know, if I'm not feeling good. And so I got on the bike, and I was going through the bike, and I ended up, next thing I know, I'm at the end of the bike, and I'm looking at my running shoes, and I'm not feeling good. And I'm thinking, well, just throw them on, and you can just stop anywhere you want, you know?
Yeah. And
I threw my shoes on, and I was running, and next thing I knew, there was only one guy ahead of me, Scott Tinley. And I'm thinking, I'm in second place on a day where I felt so lousy that I didn't think I should even be racing.
Yeah.
And now I'm in second place with the opportunity to maybe pass Scott and move into first. And I knew that because I wasn't feeling 100% that I shouldn't wait till the very end to try to pass him. And so I worked pretty hard in the middle of the run and passed him with about 5 miles to go in the run. It was a 20-mile run. And it just amazed me. And, you know, and the reason I think that's so powerful is that, you know, we like to wake up race morning feeling like everything's 100% on, and we're on. And, you know, what if you wake up and you're not in the mood? You know, the race does not care. You got to go race anyway, you know, or maybe something happened and you just don't feel your best. Well, who cares?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I went out there, and it's like, I don't have to feel 100% to, again, give 100% and just to see how the day turns out. And that has such value, and it's so worth it.
So after that 87 race in the hospital, 88 comes, and that year, the night before the race, the big matchup, Dave's got Mark Allen. Dave pulls out. He's got a knee injury. And everybody's like, oh, this is going to be Mark's year. This is it. Dave's not here. For sure he's going to win.
Yeah, that's what I thought. We got the news that he had something with a knee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Knee injury, yeah.
His knee was injured. He wasn't going to be competing. And I looked at the list, and I have beaten everybody else here. And I thought, this is my year. 1988. This is my 6th Ironman. And you have to understand now, it's not like I just showed up once a year to do this race. I had devoted my entire year to preparing for this kind of competition, right? And you only get one chance. You only get one day a year to make it work. You don't get to come back on Sunday because you're not in the mood on Saturday, you know? And so I've got this. And so I had a great swim, and I came out, and about three miles into the bike, I got a flat. I'm like, ooh, okay, it's early in the race. Just hold it together. Just change the friggin' flat. Be calm. Don't get rattled. And I had sew-ups, you know what sew-ups are, right? You glue the tire onto the rim. Well, you should have enough glue on there so that the tire doesn't come off. But if you put the glue on too early, like I'd glued that tire on a month and a half early, the glue can get very hard, and it can be very difficult and challenging to get that tire off the rim. And so there is a photo of me. Is it in? Yeah, there's a photo in this magazine of me trying. I thought I was going to break my thumbs trying to get this thing off the rim. And finally, I got so frustrated. I was just like frozen in time. Finally, I got it off, and I changed it, and I got on the bike, and I'm like, just work your way back up. And I got almost to Javi, almost up to where you make the turn to Kauai High, and then go up to Javi, and I got a second flat. And I'm like, okay, you have two spares. You've used one. Just change this next one. This one will be very easy because there's no glue on that tire. So I changed it pretty quickly. Went up to Javi, came back down, got back on the Queen K, and I'm riding along and I'm bouncing and my rim is hitting the ground. Flat number 3. I have never gotten a flat in Kona in 6 years of being there in training or racing, and I got 3 on the same day. And now I have no spares, and so I have to wait almost 15 minutes for the support vehicle to come with another wheel that the gears don't work right on my bike, and I make it to the finish, and I started the marathon, and I just felt like crap, to be honest. Yeah. And my father was waiting about 3 miles into the marathon, cheering me on. It was right by where we were staying. And I stopped and I go, I'm done. I'm just done. And so we started walking to the hotel, and I walked about 30 seconds. I'm like, I guess I don't feel that bad. And I said, I'll see you at the finish. And I started running again. I ended up having the fastest split that day on the marathon.
Yeah, and you still got 5th.
I got 5th place.
Yeah.
But again, I thought I was destined to win the event, and then these 3 sort of seemingly bizarre, as a professional, it's my job to see if there's glass on the road and to not hit it and to not get a flat, but as it turns out, it was probably the best thing because Dave Scott wasn't there, and if I'd won, I would have had to come back the next year as a defending champ to try to beat the 6-time Ironman champ, and it would have been a very different kind of competition.
Well, I think sometimes things are meant to be. If you're going to win the Ironman, you want to beat the guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Don't you think?
You want to beat the man.
You want to beat the man. At least us from a media perspective. You're going, hey, if nobody shows up, that's great. I win. That's all I want. So going into 89, it was funny with I had Competitor Magazine back then, and I was like, just had this next year is going to be it. This is going to be Mark's 7th time. I want to do a photo shoot, the 2 of them on the cover of the magazine, started looking at each other, and I called Dave, who's in Davis, California, and said, hey, Dave, this is March, right? This isn't like the day before the race. This is like 6 months before. Dave, I want to do this photo shoot with you and Mark together, having you guys posing. And he goes, not a problem. Bring Mark here to Davis, and I'll do the photo shoot with him. And I called Mark. Mark said, no problem. Come have Dave come here to Boulder, and I'll do the photo with him. Yeah, neither of them was moving. And so we ended up sending this great photographer, Dave Epperson, and those photos are in the book of him going to Davis and shooting Dave and going to Boulder and shooting Mark and then composing it on the cover of the magazine, showdown on the Kona coast. And the next October was what we call Iron War, which was still to this day the greatest race in the history of the Ironman World Championship. And if you look at it, you guys were 1 second apart in the swim. You were 1 second apart at the end of the bike. And going into that run, you'd raced Dave so many times before, you sort of were resigned to the fact, if I'm going to beat this guy, I sort of have to stay with him all day.
Yeah, he'd won the race 6 times. He had 6 victories. I was going into my 7th Ironman with 0. And so I'm like, okay, I have tried every scenario that I can think of to work, and it hasn't. So let me just try to stick with him. But just to back up, I had actually kind of changed my focus that year. I had been going into the race thinking I want to try to win it. And I realized, what, I could maybe have the best race of my life and still not have it be good enough to be first place. So I need to go into this race to just see if I can have a really good swim, bike, and run. And if I can do that, that will be a success. And that was really the focus that year. And it took a lot of that unnecessary pressure off, because my race success, my fulfillment on the day wasn't going to be dependent on how somebody else raced. If Dave Scott or some other person happened to have a better day than me, but I had the best day of my life, great. And so that really changed the dynamic. And so I thought I need to just stay with him all day. And I stayed with him on the swim, as Bob said, and I stayed right behind him on the bike. And every time he'd look back to see how I was doing, I'd sort of like hide my head so he couldn't even see my face. You know, I didn't want to give up an ounce of, I didn't want to give him any data, you know. And so we started the marathon, and he had actually, he and his wife, they'd had the birth of their first son just before that, a few months or something. And so we're running along through the town of Kona, and the first opening miles of the marathon, he was setting the pace, and we were going sub 6 minute pace, somewhere around 5:45, 5:50. And I'm thinking, this is friggin' insane, okay? And I thought, but stay with him. That was your thing. And if this is too fast and I blow up with the best guy in the world, who cares, right? And so we're running at 5:45, 5:50 pace in the heat of Kona, after the bike, open miles of the marathon, and out of the crowd comes his wife holding the baby. And she starts running next to us with the baby.
550 pace.
550 pace. And she's going, go Dave, go Dave, go Dave. And my first thought is, how is this woman running a 550 pace with a baby? Chelsea said, oh, how come you didn't have your daughter with her?
Yeah, see?
Right?
Yeah, right.
You know? And so I'm like, holy crap, right? And then I'm thinking, he's getting inspiration from this. And that's the only words I said to him that day. I turned to him and I said, Dave, that's not fair.
But then there was another guy who was in a lounge chair who was like drinking beer, and around his chair was all sorts of empty cans. And he got up and ran with you guys for a while.
I don't remember that guy.
Dave talks about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so now you're side by side, but now you got to be thinking about, when am I going to make a move here? Because the last thing you want, you know, Dave's a good downhill guy. The last thing you want is getting the Polani going down that hill, still side by side with Dave.
Yeah, you know, we went out onto the Queen K, and again, back then the marathon was, most of it was out on the Queen K Highway, and it was 10 miles straight out, 10 miles straight back, and they had this giant Bud Light inflatable that marked the turnaround point. And because you had to run out past the airport, and if you haven't been there, you won't get this, but once you get past the airport, you feel like you're running off the edge of the earth. You are so, psychologically, you are so far from the finish line. It's really difficult to hold yourself together. And you're looking at, you can see this Bud Light inflatable forever, and it never seems like it's getting closer. And I was feeling pretty good for a while. You know, we settled into a more reasonable pace. You know, we dropped down over 6 minute pace, and I was thinking, okay, this feels pretty good. And then finally, around half marathon, Dave's deciding that he's probably had enough of me. And so he starts surging, and he back off and surge and back off. And I'm trying to stay with him. Each time he would surge, it's starting to get harder and harder. And then, you know, then all the garbage came in. Like, Dave Scott, he's so strong. He's won 6 of these things. I didn't pace it right. I should have done different training. You know, I'm such a loser. Telling yourself you are a loser does not fortify you with the strength to become a champion, right? And it got so hard to stay with him that finally my mind just went quiet. And in the instant that my mind went quiet, I recalled an image that I'd seen in a magazine 2 days before the race. It was an image of a 110-year-old medicine man, shaman from Mexico, and his grandson. One was 110, Don Jose Matsua, his adopted grandson, Brant Secunda, who was, and the pictures of these two guys, they were going to be doing some kind of a workshop teaching about the tradition of a way of life from the indigenous culture in that area. They had this look on their face that was very peaceful yet powerful. And that's like that ultimate space you're trying to find in a race, that sense of calm and steadiness where you have this peace, but also that feeling of potential of what you know you can do out there. And I had that feeling of strength, and I'd had that feeling of calm, but never the two in the same place in Kona. In Nice, that was like my go-to place. I felt calm, but strong, always, always, always. And in Kona, I was always trying to find that blend. And so anyway, in this moment where my mind just goes quiet because I'm having to put every ounce of energy into staying with Dave, because if I lose a second or an inch, the race is done. And my mind goes quiet, and Don Jose's image came back to me, and it's like I could just feel like this life force coming into me, and I had this like, that's it, that peace and that calm, but that sense of power at the same time. And it just felt like I had it, and I could just feel my entire body relax, and that chatter stopped, and my breathing relaxed, and my shoulders came down, and all of a sudden I was staying with Dave, and it was effortless. And it's like, what just happened? You know, what just happened? I mean, nothing changed other than that experience of having a different focus. And you know how that is, right? If you're focusing on what's going bad, you're not going to feel good. But if you can just have that bad go to the background. You know, my legs still hurt. It was still hot. Dave didn't slow his pace down. I didn't just disappear for a month and come back with better fitness. I still had the same fitness that I started the day with. And then I could hear our feet, his feet and my feet, sweat-soaked shoes just pounding the pavement. And there's this entourage behind us, and they're dead silent. You could hear the hum of the motors of the cars and the motorcycles and the vehicles. No one was saying a word. And my breathing. And then there was that little analysis that was like, when is one of us going to make the break? And we both knew that there was undulating terrain, but there was nothing serious until the last long mile before you drop down into town, into Kona, and do the last bit to the finish line. And we both knew that was where it was going to take place. And so we were both just cat and mousing it until we got there. And at the bottom of that hill, this is at like mile 24 and a half, there was an aid station. And you have to understand that even though we're looking like we're really like friggin' on top of it, we're still both running near empty. And so your logical mind says you reach over and you grab one last glass of whatever you want to get with a little bit of calories, shove it in there, and then take off. And so we'd also seen that the first of us that got to the aid stations always got what they wanted, and the guy who comes in second is having to deal with these aid station volunteers that are like, rah! You know? And so Dave, being the courteous guy that he did, shoved himself in front of me and grabbed his last glass of whatever. And I came in to grab my last glass of whatever, and I heard this, go! And it was like I was shot out of a cannon. I don't know where that sound came from, but it was a go. And I pulled my hand back, which is counterintuitive, right? And I went as hard as I could. I started sprinting as best as you can sprint at the end of an Ironman. Not that impressive. And in the 3 seconds that it took Dave to reach and look back, I had put 5 or 6 feet on him. And you can see it in the footage. All of a sudden, his shoulders come up and he starts to rock. And now all of a sudden, he's having to deal with a fear or a situation that he never thought he would have to, because he was the best guy from hour 6 on in that race. If you were anywhere close to him, you were going to lose and he was going to win. And now somebody is pulling away from him in his territory, where he's shown for 6 years he's the strongest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I made it to the top of the hill before him. And I knew, because he was a better downhill runner, that I had to make it down to the bottom of Plani Hill and get to the flats before him. And I went as fast and as hard as I could go without falling down or cramping. I got to the bottom. I turned back and I couldn't see him. And I just stopped in the middle of the road. I just go, yes. Because I knew that there was nothing that was going to happen. And I made the turn and I came on a Leahy Drive, and there's thousands of people cheering. And the cheers were not only for that day, but for people that knew that this had taken 7 years to unfold. And I crossed the finish line. Dave came in. He had his best day on that day. He broke his world's record by almost 18 minutes.
18 minutes. His record was 8:28. He went 8:10, and Mark beat him on the best day he ever had.
Yeah.
How about a round of applause? Yeah.
I did my best time to that date by nearly 30 minutes, and the difference in our times was 58 seconds.
Yep, 58 seconds. And then it was like all of a sudden the light switch goes on because you never lost there after that, after beating Dave in 89.
Really?
Yeah, I know. And it's brand new news for you.
I
Want to get in 90?
I won all of them other ones?
Yeah. All of them. All of them. Now, you never raced Dave again, right?
No, ironically, that was the last time Dave Scott and I raced each other in Kona. The next few years, he was injured or something was going on, and he never got to the start line. In 1994, I won 5 straight from 89 through 93. 94, I stepped away from Ironman racing because that was the year that our son was born.
Yep.
And I was tired, I was burned out, and I wanted to have more time to just be a father and figure out what that meant. And so I was there watching, but I didn't compete. Dave was there that year. He was a 40-year-old, and he was in second place catching the leader. Greg Welsh got within 12 seconds of him. And as Dave is closing in on Greg on the marathon with, this gap of 12 seconds, I mean, I was shitting my pants like, oh my God, he's going to win another one, and because I knew what Dave was capable of, and Greg had never really raced Dave head to head. And so Greg looked back and saw Dave catching him, and he was just like, dude, and he pulled away.
Yeah.
Like no big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he went on to win his one and only time there. The following year, I came back and won my 6th and final title against Thomas Hellriegel, and that's a whole other story. And then after that, I was done with Ironman competition, and Dave came back twice after that. But
so 95, when you do come back, trying to get taking a year off is pretty hard. And now you're 37, you're coming back, and all these young guys like a Thomas Hellriegel, who was 25, 26 years old, 24 years old, from German military, he puts 12, 13 minutes into you.
13 and a half.
Exactly. So you're starting a marathon. This is a thing you've won. You've won this thing 5 times. You've got nothing to prove. And this guy's 13 and a half minutes down the road. What's going through your head? Where's my condo?
I was like, okay, this is really not good. Like I came into a transition area, and I had actually taken the lead early on the bike, very early on the bike, but then right after that, Thomas Hellriegel, this 24-year-old, and Jürgen Zach, who had been the guy who'd been pushing the pace on the bike, they passed me looking like they were on motorcycles, and I tried to stay with him for a brief period, but my heart rate skyrocketed, and I thought, if I stay with him, I will completely blow up, and I need to have a good marathon. And I thought,
they'll only get like 4 or 5 minutes on me on this bike ride. Well, I came into that bike transition area, and somebody yells out, he's 13 and a half minutes ahead of you. Go catch him. I'm thinking, okay, that really sucks. That meant I had to make up 30 seconds a mile, every single mile of that marathon, without fail, to catch him at the finish line. 30 seconds a mile for 26 miles in a row. And I thought, it's impossible. Nobody had closed a 13 and a half minute gap to come back to be the champion at that point in time. And nobody had won as a 37-year-old.
Yeah.
So I had like these levels of impossibility that I was facing. And back then you couldn't Google, how do you win as a 37-year-old when some guy's 13 and a half minutes ahead of you? You have to figure that kind of stuff out on the spot. And so I had to bring it down to a focus that I could wrap my brain around. And I said, let me just see if I can make up an inch or a second every step of the marathon. I can chew that off, okay? And so that's what I did. Usually I try to ease into the marathon. I go, there's no easing into it this year, ladies and gentlemen. I have to go right now. And so right from that first step, and I headed out of the transition area, and there's thousands of people cheering. And so I'm like, I'm totally into energy, right? I'm going to just suck as much of this positive energy as I can from the crowd. And they're like, go Mark, you can do it, and everybody's like, you look so good. And and I got to the top of the first hill, and there were 3 old ladies
You know how old gals are? They will tell you what they're thinking. They're clapping and they're going, "Go Mark, go Mark, go Mark." Ah, he doesn't look so good.
Honesty. Yeah, you don't need it at that point.
And that thought sunk in, and about a mile later, I felt so bad, I didn't even know if I could finish the race. And then the little voices started screaming, Hell Regal, he's 13 years younger than you. I can't even see the guy 13 and a half minutes. There's no way I can make that up. Hey, there's my condo. Just, you've won 5 of these. Everybody will understand. If we quit, there is no way to achieve those dreams that we have set out to pursue, is there? Even if we stay with it, but we give up, there is no way to achieve those great dreams that we have set out to achieve, to fulfill ourselves with that best effort that we have. And I just finally got in my mind to just be quiet. And so many things came back to me that really gave me inspiration. One was thinking back about my family and friends who had helped me to get ready to be there that year. And I thought, if I give up, I cannot honor that help. This is my day to do my thing, to honor the work that they put into me to get to this event. This is going to be my final Ironman. I also thought of some of the words that I had met Brant Secunda in the years after that first win. And he had said so many simple things that were wise. He said, it's never over until it's over. And meaning no matter how impossible something looks, take that next step, because you just never know what might happen. And he also said, no mystery is too impossible to solve. Just keep going till you figure it out. And call out to that island. It will hear you. It'll give you some help. And so I got my mind to be quiet. And then something came that really inspired me. I thought, you know what? I got into this sport in 1982 to be an Ironman finisher. I know this is going to be my final Ironman. Even if I have to walk every step of this marathon, I'm going to get to that finish line. And the way I felt at that point, if I could get to the finish line, that would be an absolute success, because I felt so lousy. And literally in the instant I said, I'm going to get to that Ironman finish line, Greg Welsh, the previous year's winner, who was about 5 seconds ahead of me up the road, stopped in the middle of the road. He stretched his back. I passed him, making the first pass. I moved from 5th place into 4th place. And all of a sudden, everything opened back up. And then I moved into 3rd. And about the half marathon point, I passed Jürgen Zach, and I moved into 2nd place. With 8 miles to go, I was told that Thomas Hellriegel was 4 minutes ahead of me. Let me do the math for you. 8 miles to go, 4 minutes back. I was making up 30 seconds a mile, but I was still only on pace to catch him at the finish line. And that is not a good place to catch a guy who is 13 years younger than you when you're sprinting for a world championship. I needed something else. I couldn't find it. And, once again, my mind was just going nuts. Like, Hellriegel, I can't even see the guy. How can I race somebody I can't even see? He's so far up there. And, I was whining. I'm a 5-time Ironman World Champion, and I'm whining. Have any of you ever whined in a race?
Oh, yeah.
My people. I love all of you. I love all of you. Every one of you. Finally, I uttered those 2 very powerful words that can help each and every one of us out of those kind of situations. Shut up. There it was. There was the quiet. And something just said, give it everything you have. Give 100%. And I realized I was holding back a little bit, because I was waiting for some guarantee to say, Mark, if you give 100%, you're going to win this thing. But life does not give us those guarantees, does it? Life is giving us challenges to say, are you going to give 100%? And if you are, then let's see what happens. And so I pulled all my attention and energy away from Hellriegel, that guy that I couldn't see, nor whose race could I control. And I just called out to the island. I said, hey, Big Island, I need something more. I'm going to give 100% of what I have to give, even if I blow up in these next 8 miles, come in a second behind Hellriegel, but I just need something else. I'm going to do my part. I need you to help me. The next mile, I made up a little over 40 seconds. The one after that, I made up over 50. The mile after that, I made up 1 minute and 15 seconds on the guy who had been leading for over 6 hours. Finally, at mile 23 of the marathon, I came up behind Thomas Hellriegel. I rested for a moment, and then I went for it, making what I was hoping would be the final pass of my Ironman career. And I went on to win that sixth and final title. And Hellriegel was finished in second place, a couple minutes back, 2.5 minutes back. But if you figure that as a percent of the total amount of time we raced each other, the difference in our times was less than 1/2 of 1%. A very small difference on a very, very long day. And so, you know, I tell you those stories because I think a lot of times people look at somebody who wins the race like I did that year, and you can actually hear it if you watch it on YouTube. Phil Liggett saying, Mark Allen like a robot in perfect control of his functions.
Yeah.
You know, I was not a robot. I may have looked like a metronome out there, but I was a human being who had to talk myself down off the ledge 1,000 times to keep going. It's universal. We all have to deal with it. We might be going different speeds. The challenge might be different, but we all have to deal with it. And I just kept bringing myself back to that simplicity of just quiet. Regrouping is not giving up. That's a big distinction to keep in the back of your mind. You can slow down. You can take a breath. You can step back for a second, but then bring yourself back into giving what you have on the day. And I'm so glad that I did. And my son was there at the finish line, and he was able to be in that energy of, you know, that experience.
Well, the cool part is, look at Hellriegel had a 13.5 minute lead, and he ran a 2:58 marathon. It's not like he fell apart. He had a great day, and so you had to run low 240s to catch him. That's a lot of pressure.
Really?
Yeah. It is. How about a round of applause for Mr. Mark Allen?